Welcome to Layer Zero. Layer Zero is a podcast of unscripted conversations with the people that make up the Ethereum community. Crypto is built by code, but it's composed by people, and each individual member of the crypto community has their own story to tell. Cypherpunks understood that the code they write impacts the people that use it, and Layer Zero focuses on the people behind the code, because Ethereum is people all the way down, and it always has been. Today, I'm talking with Danny Ryan, who is the coordinator of the Greater ETH2 effort. And Danny is in an interesting position. He's one of those people that can go deep into the weeds with code, but then also zoom all the way out and explain it to the non-technical folk like me. And so we went through a little bit of Danny's pre-Ethereum history and where he got his skills from. And it turns out he's got a little bit of an entrepreneur in him. And then we asked some greater questions as to why Danny feels, as somebody who works for the EF and kind of doesn't really have a boss, where he gets his accountability from for waking up every single day and contributing to Ethereum when no one actually forces him to do that. And then also expanding that to the other developers as well. We also talk a lot about this recent Dev Interop event and what it's like to be there as a developer. And then also I share my perspective as what it's like to view these things from the outside. And then we finish off with an interesting conversation about, I asked Danny whether he is an introvert, or excuse me, whether he is an optimist or a pessimist. And what about the world makes him what it is? And I thought his answer for that was pretty interesting. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into this conversation with Danny Ryan. But first, a moment to talk about some of these fantastic sponsors that make the show possible. MATCHA, everyone's favorite DEX aggregator, has just launched an open beta for gasless trading. So if you're trading more than $5,000 in common ETH and wrapped Bitcoin pairs, then your gas fees on MATCHA are free. And that's why you should be using MATCHA. MATCHA routes your orders across all the various DeFi exchanges on Ethereum, Polygon, Binance Smart Chain, and gives you the best possible price without any trading fees or unnecessary slippage. MATCHA has smart order routing that splits your orders across multiple liquidity sources, if MATCHA sees that it gets you better pricing. Trading on MATCHA is super easy because it pools the liquidity for me into a single and easy to use platform, and has even saved me multiple times from accidentally picking the wrong DEX to trade on and getting a bad price. MATCHA also allows you to make limit orders on chain so you can set and forget your DeFi trades, and they will go through automatically while you're away. So when you're making a trade, head over to matcha.xyz/bankless, connect your wallet, and start getting some of the best prices and most liquidity when you trade your crypto assets. ALCHEMIX is one of the coolest new DeFi apps on the scene. It introduces self-paying loans, allowing you to spend and save at the same time. Deposit the DAI stablecoin into the ALCHEMIX vault in order to get an advance on the interest it generates. Borrow up to 50% of the total amount of your deposited DAI in the form of ALUSD stablecoin. Here's the craziest part. The loan pays itself back and you cannot be liquidated. Unlock your asset's potential in the ultimate DeFi savings account. And brand new to ALCHEMIX is the ETH Vault, where you can deposit ETH into the application, borrow ALETH against your deposits, while having your advance gradually paid back over time. V2 is rapidly approaching, which will allow for even more collateral types, plus a variety of yield strategies to choose from. Harness the power of ALCHEMIX at alchemix.fi. That's ALCHEMIX.fi. Follow ALCHEMIX on Twitter at ALCHEMIXFI and join the Discord to keep up to date with ALCHEMIX V2 and to get involved in governance. Hey, Danny, how's it going?
Pretty good.
Yeah? Having a good time?
Basement. Yeah.
Where's your basement? Where in the world is your basement? Can I dox you as the first thing I ask on the show?
Yeah, that's reasonable. I don't think it's a secret. Boulder, Colorado.
Ah, one of the Colorado clans, huh?
Yeah. I've been here for a couple of years.
Yeah, the Michael Wong, the guy who does culture and memes at Bankless, jokes about how all the Colorado people are really into public goods and have long hair.
Well, I won't pull it down, but I think I have the longest of the hair.
Longer than Milwaukee?
Oh, yeah. My hair's to my waist.
What?
Yes. I'll actually pull it down.
Oh, my God. Really?
Yeah. It's usually in a braid if it's down,
Right.
which, you know.
Oh, my God. It is the longest hair. Wow. You have the longest hair in all of Ethereum. Look at that.
I think I
That
might.
is
Yeah.
Well, that's great. How long have you been growing that thing out?
I don't really know. I mean, a while. I think,
Before you were in Ethereum?
yeah, but probably like 3 years ago, I cut off like 6 inches.
I just wanted to be 6 inches shorter. 3
People
feet
tell
too
me
long.
you're supposed to trim it to keep it healthy, but I don't
right.
follow the guidance.
Well, wow, I've already learned something new about you so early into this show. Danny, I want to hear about your time before Ethereum. What did you do? What were you doing right before you got into Ethereum?
I was doing a mix of various like software and business consulting.
Mm-hmm.
So my niche was probably like not just being a hired hand, but also like working closely with small business CEOs to like help them figure out how technology could actually make their lives better. Some of this was like helping like literally small businesses in like Louisiana that like literally didn't know databases existed, or like how to track customers and things like that. And that was, you could make a big impact. But I also did a lot of work with a company called Kid & Co., which was like an Airbnb knockoff for families traveling with kids. So I built a lot of that stuff and like worked closely with the CEO on, I don't know, strategy and that kind of stuff.
Were you like working as an individual or was it under a company?
Always, I mean, as a company, but just as a front for myself, you know, limit some liability and help with taxes and that kind of stuff.
And so your typical client was like kind of a boomer that didn't really know technology is what it is. Is that the vibe?
It was a bit of a mix. You know, I think it was actually not boomers. It was probably like 30 somethings that were like, you know, go-getter businessmen that just hadn't awoken to all the things that technology could do for themselves.
Was being an entrepreneur one of like, have you always been an entrepreneur? Or before that, did you ever like work for a company, ever work for a 9-to-5?
I've never had a real job, I don't think.
Really?
I started a screen printing company when I was 15. It still runs today. And that's my fallback. Yeah.
Wow.
My business partner and best friend, that's his full-time gig, but I'm still involved somewhat.
No way. Okay. This is like apparel, right? Just like making cool shirts and stuff like that. You started that when you were 15?
Yeah. I mean, we primarily do it for other people. So like they can take the risk on of like their cool shirt and try to sell it.
Just make it.
We do like 100 to 10,000 piece orders for all sorts of different entities. Got a shop in Louisiana.
Okay. So would you say that you've always had some sort of entrepreneur DNA part of you?
I would, yeah. And I've always had the desire to not have a normal job and to dictate my time on my own standard. And this is probably the most normal of a job I have. I mean, it's like I work for an entity. Mm-hmm. I don't have hours, but I have things that I'm trying to do and I get paid to do them. But it's entrepreneurial in a sense that like no one tells me what to do. Right. And I just see what needs to be done and kind of try to bring the value where I can.
Definitely. Yeah. So you are your own leader, even though you have a paycheck, which is the fact that the EF is the most normal job you've ever had is absolutely insane. When did you learn to code?
In college. I've always like used computers and was like a power user probably, but I never dipped into coding until I had to take a computer science course for a mechanical and aerospace engineering degree I was doing. And this is my sophomore year of college, and I loved the class and switched my major and went all in. And and was like, felt like a late bloomer, like I'm never going to make it in computer science or programming because like people have been doing this since they were 2. But it worked out. It's working out.
Yeah. What about code just resonated with you?
It felt immediately like the most sane way to get through college because it was fun. I guess I was doing the mechanical and aerospace engineering degree. So I thought I would like build things. But you didn't really build stuff at my school until junior or senior year. Whereas day 0 of the programming class, I was like building cool little things. And that just kind of struck me. And it felt like solving puzzles. And I felt like I could I could spend the rest of my college career solving puzzles, and it would get me through school at least.
Mm-hmm. So the is the builder DNA also in you as well? Like whatever medium you have to build something, the easiest and the fastest is what resonates.
Probably so. I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm a builder, and then I see my wife who's like sewing and like making dresses and like is always building shit, like literally always building shit. And I'm like, I'm not much of a builder.
Wait, you don't think you're much of a builder?
I am a communicator. I'm a prototyper. I like to think deeply about hard problems, but like at a certain point, I'm also not the guy who builds it, and nor do I think I'm the right one. Like if you look at the Sigma Prime team, Paul's a builder. Paul like Rex building Lighthouse and like is just constructing crazy shit. I mean, Proto is a builder too. And I build things, but I do a lot of other things too. And like if I spend all of my time trying to build things and trying to bring something totally to production from my own hands, I have a hard time doing that. I have a hard time like focusing quite like that. So I like the mix of stuff I do.
I made this mistake with Kevin Owocki once, or maybe it's actually Ryan that alluded to Steve Jobs, and Kevin was like, "I don't like that analogy, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it anyways." Where Steve Wozniak was yelling at Steve Jobs, saying, "What is it that you actually do? Like, what are your skills? Like, you don't actually build anything." And Steve Jobs gives this anecdote of like somebody going up to a conductor of an orchestra and asking more or less the same question, like, "What do you do that a metronome can't do?" And the conductor gets really, really offended, obviously, and he goes, "Well, the trumpeter plays the trumpet, and then the flutist plays the flute. I play the orchestra." Right, like that's his instrument. Would you say that metaphor is kind of apt for how you are the conductor of all the ETH2 client teams?
I will not take like the Steve Jobs analogy direct. I cannot accept that, but I will say to a certain extent, because like the conductor probably played an instrument most of his life and knows music inside and out. Knows how to communicate about the music and things like that, and so. To a certain extent, sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. So what has it been like to be so the other metaphor that I think I have for what I think you do is like kind of like a traffic control man for all of the different just like packets of communication data that all the different client teams talk about. Me and Ryan were just got out of done recording a weekly roll up, and we were reading one of the ZK rollups, like announcement blog posts. And we were just trying to unpack their blog posts over and over and over again. And like, it was very, very clear that a developer wrote this blog post, not a communicator. So like, as somebody who's a good communicator, what's it been like to like communicate with all these like, developers who speak in this very, very like technical, non-communicative way?
It's fun. I mean, I can speak the language, and I don't just communicate. Like in this interop last week, like I did a lot of communication. I did a lot of kind of organization stuff, but I'm in the weeds, like figuring out like the optimizing the engine API, right? And like figuring out how that's actually going to run and like some of the edge cases and stuff. And so like, I think if I could not get deep into it, that I would not be effective at what I'm doing or what I've been doing the past few years. And so on the technical side, it's very fun. And then I really enjoy explaining things. I really enjoy teaching. And so I really enjoy like finding the right metaphor or the right like analogy to communicate a technical concept to people who maybe aren't as deep in the weeds. And so because I get to be deep in the weeds, then I also get to then turn around on the other side and communicate outward.
So when you're at these dev interop events where everyone there speaks code, like speaks developer, you don't need to use metaphors, right? Like that's metaphors are for you to communicate to people like me, or do metaphors, are they useful in that environment? Like what are the communication skills there?
That's an interesting question. The metaphors are different. but they're still valuable. They're still like, sometimes you're talking about something very complicated. And like, if you can abstract it and be able to talk about it more from a higher level, like one, you're going to get the 3 people in the room over here that knew what was going on and the 4 people over here that didn't quite yet. You're going to help expedite that process, which is good. And also just, it helps. Like, we all have to think about different, like we have to be able to think about different layers of abstraction. So like, once we have a good metaphor, even though we've like worked on the minute details of thing A and thing B, but once we have a metaphor for how thing A and thing B kind of live together at a higher level, once you have the details worked out, then you can talk about that higher level and not have to worry about the details unless you like need to open it back up and go back in. So they're very valuable. Yeah. They're not the same metaphors all the time. Sometimes they cross, sometimes they're good for educating an outside audience and for communicating amongst oneself. But they're certainly valuable. Computer science is all about abstraction, and that's, metaphors in a certain sense.
Is there a specific event that comes to mind when like you just could not figure out how to get 2 teams to communicate, or you couldn't communicate with someone? Was there ever like a big like breakdown in communication that's happened? That's a story you can tell us about? Anything come to mind there? There are some things. And these types of things are, if you talk to my wife, would be the things that over the past 3 or 4 years have like stressed me out the most, is this communication breakdowns. I will not go in too deep about any one of them. I will say that early on in the ETH2 beacon chain journey, we had done a lot of work on consensus, a lot of work on the core security, the core state transition, how these things come together. But the networking was not in full view. And there was a bit of a lack of expertise on the networking and ownership over it. And when we got there, that was probably one of the hardest times, is just that there were parties on both sides of the aisle that thought very, very different things about how the networking should be built and how it should look. And it like almost drove me crazy, because I could not like, it took probably months to get past and resolve an issue. And ultimately it came down to just being like, we're going to do it this way. We can't do it both ways. Sorry. And usually we're better at compromise. Usually we're better at finding a solution where all the parties are like, eventually all the parties are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Which is really good. I think in Ethereum, most people operating at this layer 1, like they truly want to find the right solution. And like often we propose solutions that get iterated on or just totally shut down. And like, you have to do that. And most people are very good at that and don't bring a lot of ego to their solutions. And because of that, I don't think we get to these like weird impasses where we're just bike shedding to death. I mean, we bike shed certainly, but like not about the important things. What's bike shedding?
It is a term used quite a bit. But the idea is we're building a bike shed, you and I. And obviously bike sheds, foundation, they probably need a concrete foundation, they need walls, they need a door, all sorts of stuff. You maybe even need locks for your bikes, for security. But like, instead of dealing with all that, we're sitting here arguing about like the color we're going to paint the shed, and the shed doesn't even exist yet. And so bike shedding is when people get hung up on some sort of minute detail that like doesn't really matter. And we're not even getting to the meat of it. So like, the name of an API endpoint, like that could be the thing that is bike shed to oblivion, because there's no correct name. There's literally no correct answer. Like it becomes a matter of opinion. And once you get to these areas that are a bit more of a matter of opinion rather than like some sort of absolute correctness, and nothing has an absolute correctness, but there's certainly things that like get closer in that direction. But when you get farther away from that direction, like naming things like that, you get into bike shedding. And if you look at like all core dev calls, sometimes it'll be like 20% meat and then 80% bike shedding. But then if you say that people are bike shedding, then somebody that really cares about the issue would be like, this isn't bike shedding. This is really, really important. So
right. They don't think they're bike shedding. They think that they are presenting the objective. Right. Okay. So I want to unpack that a little bit, because building Ethereum, no one knows what Ethereum is. It's kind of like the internet, and like the future of Ethereum is like what Ethereum should be is a subjective thing, right? We don't have any objective reference point for what we are trying to build when we're building Ethereum. So like you said, all choices are subjective, and some are easier to come to consensus to versus others. Would you say like one way to describe your role is that like you are the facilitator of all these subjective decisions? Some of these subjective decisions, all the teams have consensus on, so we can just leave that, we put that in the rearview mirror. But perhaps a lot of them need to have, powwows and deliberation and debriefs about how and why choices are made. So would you say like your role has been to be the facilitator of these conversations about these subjective choices?
That's one of my roles. I'd say that's one of my roles. And like it is subjective. There is no absolute as to where we're going, but there are design considerations. There are like deep philosophical things that are guiding us. Obviously, like we don't have to all agree on them all, but like you can begin to cite, you've been like, we've been working on proof of stake for like 6 years. And like, it has these are things we're trying to achieve. And like the ethos of the community is kind of rallied around this, and so that becomes something to help guide you. But also there's other design considerations, like complexity is the enemy of everything in consensus systems. And so like minimizing complexity, even at the cost of some advanced feature set or like some optimization, often, is a guiding light. And that, is generally agreed upon, but maybe there's 5% of engineers in this process that like, they're not afraid of complexity at all. Right. So there, there's like a compromise that has to happen there. So yeah, subjective, but there's this like ethos and philosophy and kind of design guiding light that's guiding us. And sometimes I have to help try to contextualize that. Sometimes I have to help try to figure out what the community thinks is the designing light or the priorities. And like, I don't know, it's all messy.
Right. So yes, you said values and ethos will help guide the decisions. How well defined do you think that actually is? Because like, if you really want to get down to it, there's no actual single source of truth for anything in this universe. Right. Like, are there any very, very concrete things that like, well, this choice abides by this set of values? Obviously, like decentralization is perhaps a very concrete value that no one disagrees with. Are there any other values that like you can like name for us here?
But even decentralization is on a spectrum. And so like, the Bitcoiners might say that we've like gone off the deep end on, in terms of it being some sort of centralized process or centralized protocol or something like that. And I don't agree with that. But then I think other protocols have gone off the deep end in terms of centralization and design considerations and things like that. So decentralization, certainly top one. Decentralization also, there's many different things that can mean. Often in protocol design, we're considering like it not being able to be captured by powerful interests, it not being able to be censored and things like that. And I would say there's an ethos in Ethereum of assuming that the world as it is today and then the way the world interacts with blockchains today is not as the world will be in 5, 10, or 20 years. Mm-hmm. So you end up seeing protocols that they make what people consider pretty large compromises because, well, this is how it works. No one's doing this, no one's doing that. Like, it's going to be fine. Whereas there's a very strong ethos in Ethereum, assuming that something that can be captured will likely be attempted to be captured if it's valuable enough. And we're attempting to build things that are very big and very valuable. And so we're trying to think about like, what happens when a state actor cares? What happens when, some mega cartel of some of the richest people in the world care, like that kind of stuff? What happens when the banks are trying to shut it down? And so that's definitely a design consideration. What are the other philosophies? That proof of stake's better than proof of work. Yeah. I mean, I could.
That seems pretty binary.
Yeah. I mean, There might be a spectrum there. Yeah, it might be. We were trying to do hybrid proof of work, proof of stake at one point. So that's the spectrum. Although I don't think that was actually a good idea, even though I wrote the EIP. But I mean, it's messy. It's messy.
What's something that could be captured? Because like obviously all of Ethereum is like, or like, you know, enough stake to validate the chain in ways that you deem appropriate. Like obviously having enough ether, that's one way to get captured. Right. But like, what are the other like mechanisms that like maybe somebody that's not developer minded like I am wouldn't think of that is like an attack point that you guys try and harden up?
Well, I think that this is something you would think about, which is capture the governance process.
Sure.
You know, like the fact that you can upgrade Ethereum is dangerous.
Right.
The fact that we can upgrade Ethereum is dangerous, and probably becomes increasingly so as the powers that be give a shit about this stuff.
Right.
You know, like there's a bunch of developers, a bunch of community members, there's a bunch of signals and stuff, and those I'm certain could all be manipulated. And I don't think that's what's happening today, but I do think that could happen in the future. Right.
What about something that actually involves writing code in a specific way, where if we write the code this way, like it might be open for capture in the future?
Yeah. Let's think. One thing that comes to mind is P2P networking. You know, we make assumptions about the amount of honest actors on a network. We make assumptions about being able to connect and being able to get in and actually find the right network. And some of that, the P2P stuff in general, actually becomes a bit like a bit harder to define in an objective way. Like consensus mechanisms, you can be like, if two alternative chain histories were created, a minimum of this amount of stake is slashable. Like that, you're very clear to define it. Whereas like defining someone being griefed on a P2P network and all the vectors there and are being eclipsed and things like that is usually a bit tougher. And so definitely places that you have to, it's easy to not harden that, I guess is the point, but you got to spend the time doing that. Let me think. Dependencies. That's an interesting one. Reducing the software dependencies that you have reduces the ability for people to kind of make their way into your code unsuspectingly. Like for example, if you had a dependency for a big integer library, some random library, and like one guy maintains it, and like your client is running on this, then all of a sudden that one guy can potentially like get a bug in that dependency that then affects all the arithmetic in your client, which could then lead to XYZ bug, you know, printing 1 million ether or something like that. Multi-client helps us there. But it's, you know, there's a lot of different entry points.
Not even an attack vector that I even knew existed.
That's called a supply chain attack on the software itself. But there's hardware supply chain attacks too. And apparently, you know, well, there's a lot of stuff there, but you could imagine there being some sort of box that people love to stake on, and you literally just bug the hardware and you steal people's keys.
Right. You know? Yeah, but that's not your responsibility.
It's not, but it's worth considering if there are safe ways to try to prevent that. I mean, one consideration for that would be like the separation of the active staking key and the withdrawal credentials. You know, by doing that, by having the ultimate ownership of funds being a key that could be much colder and maybe on a hardware wallet, you know, protects you against certain supply chain attacks. At least, you know, those attacks could still potentially steal keys, and could get you slashed, but you maybe lose 1 ETH instead of 32 ETH. Right. So there are protocol design considerations there.
What you're talking about, I think for listeners who didn't follow that, is that when you stake your 32 Ether, you predetermine the outbound Ethereum address where when you unstake that Ether, where that Ether actually goes. So when you unstake your Ether, rather than just like unstake my Ether and send it to this address, you actually give your Ethereum address that it will be unstaked to when it is unstaked. That was right? Right.
Right.
So you talked about there are some assumptions that are made in the Ethereum protocol, and this is of course a subjective decision that must be made. With historically with all these client teams and making these decisions, are people generally come to consensus about these things, about what the assumption level should be, or is it a bunch of is there disagreement or tend toward disagreement or tend toward agreement? What's that process like? Case by case basis?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of case by case basis. I think that the people that are working on, the proof of stake consensus aspect of this protocol, one, inherited a lot. So inherited a lot of the philosophy and a lot of the design considerations from ETH1, from the existing proof of work chain. A few core people wrote a lot of the initial specifications. So like myself, Vitalik, Justin Drake, and others. And so those initial specifications are grounded deeply with a certain philosophy. But then design and considerations ripple outward from there. So one, we iterate quite a bit on specifications with engineers and teams. And then the specifications only contain so much. So engineers are ultimately making decisions, but I think they are grounded very deeply in a certain ethos. But you do see a bit of you see different philosophical decisions coming out in different clients. So maybe like an enterprise client might cut corners here or there to make things nice for enterprise, or make some user experience really nice, whereas like a client that wants to be running on unstoppable embedded hardware and like routers and all sorts of stuff all over the world, like they might have like a different standard that they're holding to, and maybe it makes the UX worse.
Mm-hmm. Switching gears a little bit here, although I think this conversation is going to weave in and out a little bit, is the culture around all of these client devs. None of them work for the EF. They correct me if I'm wrong here. They all kind of have their own internal treasury that they use to pay out all of the developers. But I feel like the vibe of the job is they're all kind of what you described your job at the EF is like, well, you receive a paycheck, but you don't really answer to anyone. You kind of just have your job. So everyone's a lot more loosely organized. Everyone kind of just like gets up and loosely works. So like the answer is probably obvious, but like when you get up in the morning and like, I don't think you have a boss, or maybe you technically do, but you probably doesn't feel like you do. Like what keeps you accountable? Like why does Danny actually do the things that are in his job description?
I ask myself that sometimes. I don't have a job description, but I
perceived job description.
Yeah, because I care a lot, and I don't know why. I mean, I think I know why, but sometimes, throughout the years it ebbs and flows in different directions, but like, I cannot help myself. Like I cannot not wake up and immediately like figure out what the new problem is, or wake up and like realize that if I don't do X, Y, or Z, that the merge literally might be delayed by 2 weeks because we're like trying to get the specs out and stuff. Mm-hmm. And like, I care. And then I care because I care about the technology, but I also like the way it's all structured is it's all this open source project that we're building together. And it's a community. So like the accountability doesn't necessarily come from a direct boss or anything. The accountability comes from the fact that I'm a member of this community building this thing. Mm-hmm. And I have this emergent responsibility building this thing with these people. And if I didn't do what I thought I could do and do my best to do so, I would be not giving my all to this community that I care about and I'm deeply integrated in. And there's a community angle. There's the like, I care about shipping this piece of technology. And then I don't know, there's a certain level of obsession that I and pretty much everyone else I work with has. And that's probably because of the community thing. It's probably because of the impact, but it's just like someone mentioned it, like Ethereum is just the ultimate nerd snipe. And I the word nerd isn't even the right word. Like I don't necessarily consider myself a nerd, but just the like, it is such an interesting problem. It is such like the combination of economics and cryptography and game theory and programming and distributed systems. Like it's unbelievable. It's like hilariously interesting. And it's captivated me for many years now.
I just had to look up nerd snipe. So for those that also needed to look up nerd sniping is a slang term that describes a particularly interesting problem that is presented to a nerd, often a physicist, tech geek, or mathematician. The nerd stops all activity to devote attention to solving the problem, often at his or her own peril. Danny, do you feel like at your own, do you feel in peril at times because of Ethereum?
Sometimes I feel like
twice
Ethereum,
if Ethereum holds you hostage.
I think it might. I'm serious. Like I've been infected, like the memes, but the memetics, like the infectious idea, like that thing, like, I've definitely been infected. Like it's hard for me to think about other things. I have to like rip myself away and like go to the gym or go hike in the woods to like force myself to not think about this thing, which is incredible. I never thought I'd be so wrapped up in something and care so much about something, but it's also a lot.
Yeah. Do you like, if you went and just like effed off for the day, like went to the beach or just like whatever, like maybe two days in a row, like would you feel guilty? What emotions would you feel while you were not working on Ethereum?
No, I don't think definitely some anxiety because like it all keeps moving. Like, cause I'm going to open my phone, even if I didn't look at it for 2 days, I'm going to open my phone. I'm going to have literally 500 messages. And like many of them are going to be in like interesting technical conversations that one, I want to follow. And two, I often have very strong opinions about all of these conversations. And so like, I want to make sure that I help steer in the direction that I think is good. And so, if I disappear for too long, who knows, it might be steered in that direction. I have to like try to right the ship.
Right. Somebody might have implemented a DPoS EIP or something.
I don't mean to imply. So I think I work a lot. I do. And I love, and I enjoy it. But I think I actually have like a pretty good work-life balance compared to some. Like I go to the gym almost every day. I love camping. I love hiking. I got a beautiful wife that we hang out with, plenty of friends, that kind of stuff. So like I pride myself in having a good work-life balance, but I also think I work a ton. So I don't know where the line is.
Right. Yeah. The cool thing about Ethereum is like when I think everyone who finds a job in probably greater crypto too, is that no one actually feels like they're working. I mean, I'm sure some people do. But the perhaps why this thing has been so sustainable when it comes to infecting your brain is that because like it doesn't actually feel like work. Yes, I agree. And simultaneously, it does not feel like working, but it can still be exhausting. Sure. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. There's plenty of things that aren't work are very exhausting.
Running a marathon is exhausting, but it's not technically my job.
Right. Have you ever thought about like what you're going to do with yourself once Ethereum calcifies?
No. I will either not be in technology or I will be working on open source technology. I will not be working on closed source technology ever. I know
that as a matter of principle.
Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't interest me. And also one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing is because, I'm trying to make an impact on the world. And I don't think closed source software is the right way for me to make that impact.
Right.
But we'll see. It's hard to imagine doing something else. Although I certainly will do something else eventually. And yeah, my guiding principle is to work on things that I care about. And to try to create value, not in the sense of like lining my pockets with cash, but like fundamentally try to create value. And in doing so, I will continue to open doors and be able to work on interesting things. That has worked out for me so far. I'm also a very fortunate, very lucky person in many respects. But I figure if I keep doing what I'm doing, keep working on interesting things, keep working with interesting people, that whatever that next door is, it'll be a good one.
Do you see yourself putting the entrepreneur hat back on and building something on Ethereum? Like now that you've finished the foundation, build a product.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I think that would be, it'd have to be the right thing and have to be the right people. If there was a person or two that I really, really wanted to essentially hack on a project with for a few years, then I would. But I'm not certain. There's a funny, so I got into proof of stake. So like I work on a lot of things, but like I really focus on proof of stake implementations and research and specifications and security and all that kind of stuff. In 2017, right at the beginning, I got rid of all my clients because I had become obsessed with Ethereum and I was going to figure out how to make it work, how to make it my job. For that first probably half year, I was just kind of bumbling around. I lived in New Orleans at the time, and I thought to myself, if I'm going to be serious about this, I need to go to the New Orleans Ethereum meetup. And there wasn't one. So I made the New Orleans Ethereum meetup, and then I was like, I had never contributed to open source before, which is crazy because I was a believer in open source and I used it a lot in my projects and stuff, but I had not like gone to a project and just contributed back. So I was also like, just start contributing to anything and everything. I contributed to Piper's Web3.py library, a Python tooling library for Ethereum, and started just contributing to things. And I wrote a few smart contracts trying to figure out maybe there's a business opportunity there. And then I was like learning more about this proof of stake thing coming. And my first thought was, that's never going to work. That doesn't make any sense. But then two days later, 2 weeks later, 2 months later, I don't remember. I was like, oh, I get it. Both of these are proof of dedication of scarce economic resource to the protocol. It's easy to prove that about mining hardware and electricity. And it's also easy to prove about the end protocol asset itself. And so I was like, okay, this is starting to make sense. And so I thought, maybe I could make a staking pool. And so I started digging into proof of stake because I thought it was coming in like 5 months. Mm-hmm. And I thought I could make a staking pool. And so like that opened up my contributions. Like that is why I got into proof of stake, because I was like, there might be a business opportunity here. Mm-hmm. And it turned out there was a lot of work to still do. So I had to kick the can down the curb on the business opportunity. And I will say wholeheartedly at this point, I have zero intention of making a staking pool. That does not interest me at all at this point. But that's the business opportunity was what actually made me do the deep dive on proof of stake to begin with.
That's pretty funny. I also in 2018 thought about like a model for a staking pool company. And I actually pitched it to this ICO advisory company that I worked for at the time. And Peter Vestness, who was the owner of the company, New Alchemy, he said that proof of stake is years away. And I was like, no, it's not, Peter. No, it's like right around the corner. It's like 6 months away. We got to start building this thing. And that was, again, in 2018.
Yeah. Yeah. I helped write EIP 1011. Hybrid proof of work, proof of stake. And at the time and that was in 2018, I was like certain mainnet by the end of 2018, no problem. Like no problem.
It's really funny that like the 2017 bull market, at least inside of the Ethereum land, everyone was like buying Ether, and Ether was running up to $1,400 because people were like speculating that staking is
Casper's coming.
Casper's coming. It's like, it's right around the corner. Right. And in 2020 and 2021, it's the same thing.
It's really coming. It's coming. I went to the merge interop and saw some beautiful things. It is actually coming.
How was that, by the way?
I was thinking about it when you said that work doesn't feel like work, because multiple times during that week and we were in Greece, I was like walking back to my room and I get overwhelmed just with like I'm having a fantastic time. Like I'm having a great time. And after having been spending 8 hours like in a room with 30 other people, like thinking about hard problems and debugging software and all that kind of stuff, which like I don't know if I don't know if I'm allowed to consider that having a great time, but I was having a great time. So it was awesome. It was like exactly the right time, exactly the right group of people, and 5 times more productive than our wildest dreams. So it was very, very excellent.
Is the in real life component the reason why it's so productive, you think?
I would say yes, except yes, with an asterisk. The asterisk being that it has to be the right time in a project. It has to be the right group. Like, it made a lot of sense because we're done with London, we're done with Altair, and we have like the core specs for all the stuff. And there was a little bit of lead time so that people could work on and lay the foundations in their software before we met. And so like all of that, doing all of the other stuff before probably would have wasted time if we were together. Whereas we got together and we had this like very interesting structure and interop where a lot of the software work had been done leading up to it. And what you're doing is you're kind of like pairing off with different groups and you're like, can our software work together? Oh, let's fix the bugs. And then you switch and you go with other group and you kind of like architect this pyramid of increasing complexity throughout the week. And at the same time, having conversations to iron out, okay, now that everyone has implemented the specs, what are the issues? What do we need to refine? So we could have very deep conversations about ironing out the last bits of the specs, and at the same time also like do this like culmination thing where we get to this mega milestone at the end of the week. And so yes, there's magic to being in person, but I'm also like a decentralization maximalist for a lot of it too, because like the value in what I can do at home and writing software and stuff, like it's just a different type of exchange. And you don't want one or the other all the time. But it was really nice coming together after like 2 years of being apart.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people had very similar feelings in New York recently for mainnet, where a lot of people are literally just coming out of their homes for the first time since COVID. And also crypto is very, very different in 2021 than pre-COVID times. Like we've actually blossomed into some sort of like society, and just the richness of the social interactions as a result of that, or just maybe just in general inside of crypto. For some reason, social interactions in crypto seem far more rich than all the other social interactions I've ever had in any other context. And I think maybe it's because everyone has like shared stories, shared values, shared like purpose, and is also intellectually curious. I think everyone in crypto is generally intellectually curious. And then like when you like hide people away for 2 years and then get them and then pump their asset prices by 10x and then put them in a room together, turns out they have like a lot of things to share.
Yeah, I think that's all very true.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation with Danny thus far. Stay tuned for the second half of the show, where we talk further about the Dev Interop event and also Danny's optimism or pessimism about the future of the world and what he can do about that. I had a fantastic time talking with Danny here. But first, before we get there, I want to talk about some of these fantastic sponsors that make the show possible. ARBITRUM is an Ethereum scaling solution that's going to completely change how we use DeFi and NFTs. And now it's live and has over 100 projects deployed. Gas fees on Ethereum L1 suck. Too many people want to use Ethereum and it doesn't have enough capacity for all of us. And that's why teams like ARBITRUM have been hard at work developing layer 2 solutions that makes transactions on Ethereum cheap and instant. ARBITRUM increases Ethereum's throughput by orders of magnitude at a fraction of the cost of what we are used to paying. When interacting with ARBITRUM, you can get the performance of a centralized exchange while tapping into Ethereum's level of security and decentralization. This is why people are calling this Ethereum's broadband moment, where we get to add performance onto decentralization and security. If you're a developer and you want to save on gas costs and overall make a better user experience, go to developers.offchainlabs.com to get started building on ARBITRUM. And if you're a user, keep an eye out for your favorite DeFi apps being built on ARBITRUM. Many DeFi applications on the Ethereum L1 are migrating over to layer 2s like ARBITRUM, and some are even skipping over the layer 1s entirely and deploying directly on layer 2. There's so many apps coming online to ARBITRUM, so go to bridge.arbitrum.io now and start bridging over your ETH or any of the tokens listed, and start having the DeFi or NFT experience that you've always wanted. Living a bankless life requires taking control over your own private keys. Not your keys, not your crypto. That's why so many in the Bankless Nation already have their Ledger hardware wallet, which makes proper private key management a breeze. But the Ledger ecosystem is much more than just a secure hardware wallet. Ledger is the combination of the Ledger hardware wallet and the Ledger Live app. And if you're used to seeing all of your crypto services and favorite DeFi apps all in one spot, Ledger Live is where you want to be. Not only does Ledger let you buy your crypto assets straight from the app, but it also hooks into all of the DeFi apps and services that you're used to. Using Ledger Live, you can stake your ETH in Lido, swap on dexes like Paraswap, or display your NFTs with Rainbow. You can also use Wallet Connect inside of Ledger Live to connect to all the other DeFi apps that keep coming online. DeFi never stops growing, and the Ledger Live app grows alongside with it. So click the link in the show notes to see all of the DeFi apps that Ledger Live has, and stay tuned as more apps come online. And if you don't have a Ledger hardware wallet, what are you even waiting for? Go to ledger.com, grab a Ledger, download Ledger Live, and get all of your DeFi apps all in one space.
The thing about the interop and about some other similar events is like how much everyone gives a shit. Raises the level of engagement, the level of conversation, and level of just enthusiasm and fun. Whereas I could imagine being in a more traditional business context and like people are there to like do their job, but there's not that giving a shit that's there. Also, just everyone's so aligned on shipping the merge. Philosophically, from a perspective of climate change, like all sorts of angles, like everyone there was like they're on a mission, like we are doing this thing. Whereas you could imagine other things, even in Ethereum or in crypto, there's like less of that like deep mission, like state expiry. I mean, state expiry is incredible. Like we need a sustainable state solution, period. End of discussion. But it doesn't have that as much of this like world changing feeling to it. But I'm also very biased. I love proof of stake.
Why is proof of stake so grand when it comes to meaning and impact for so many people at the DevOps event and or just the Ethereum devs in general?
One of the big things was climate change. A lot of people just like, and I hadn't expected how much most of the people at that event were feeling impacted by that. Like I talk about, proof of stake, making things more secure, more sustainable, and more scalable all the time, and I mentioned the reduction in energy usage by like 99.99%, and I think it makes an impact to some, but I was surprised, and I shouldn't have been, but I was surprised throughout the week how often various developers were just like, this is literally the most impactful thing I will ever do with respect to climate change in my life. Like I will not be able to outstep this accomplishment, so there was just this like feeling of actually being able to make an impact, especially when you look at estimations and Ethereum uses like as much energy as Poland or something, and climbing.
Is it simply just a function of Ethereum using less electricity, or is there a deeper like relationship between proof of stake and climate change, or is it simply as simple as just moving away from proof of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's if we have crypto economic consensus mechanisms and which the asset securing it, the quantity and capital securing the protocol scales with the value of the protocol. When that is energy consumption, you quite simply have this like tough relationship between energy consumption and the security and value of the protocol, which like we all want the security and value of the protocol to increase. And so there's a bit of a dark side to it. I don't buy the like Bitcoiner green energy thing, or that like Bitcoin is going to usher in the new wave of green energy. I don't buy that. I think there is probably some nuance to the argument. I think you could have like an interesting debate as to like, if you have these proof of work mechanisms, what does the future look like in 20 years? Does it look like Bitcoin using 50% of all the energy in the world? Probably not. It's like, it's hard to imagine that becomes the reality. And so maybe there's like more nuance into how this actually ripples outward. But nonetheless, I would make a pretty grand bet that 80% or more of Bitcoin and Ethereum's energy consumption is not clean.
Right.
and making an impact on that seems meaningful. I think there's other components, not just CO2 emissions, climate change, that kind of stuff. I mean, there's also the access and the potential, like the amount of people that can participate in a proof of stake protocol in a meaningful way is probably much larger than proof of work. It's also more equitable in a sense that I can very purely turn capital into an equitable participation in the securing the protocol, whereas in proof of work, like that scales very poorly for small actors. So like the more capital that you have, the more entrenched you can get into real world supply chains, the more return you can get on your capital and the economies of scale. And so like, you know, fundamentally, even you set the energy stuff aside, that asset being grounded so much in the real world, in not the metaverse, means that you don't get kind of the same equitability in the crypto economic consensus mechanism, which one is maybe not nice from a philosophical standpoint, but it's also not nice from a security standpoint.
Was there any conversations at this Interop event about Bitcoin and how Bitcoin is like bad or needs to change or should be shut down, or any sort of like resistance towards Bitcoin as a system?
We don't spend too much time on Bitcoin. It's certainly, it's the butt of jokes sometimes. You know, I think people that are working on Ethereum proof of stake find Bitcoin probably pretty uninteresting. It's very interesting because it moved the needle, you know, went from 0 to 1, but people also, I think, tend to find it very uninteresting. And then there's certainly toxic members of any community. I think if you look at Twitter, there's a lot of loud, toxic Bitcoin community members. And so I think that sometimes when conversations come up with that type of group, like we would focus on that, or instead of focusing on maybe some of the good, but I don't think we see a lot of the good because we're not deeply rooted in their community, and we just see the loud, toxic people. In conversations there was a running joke about writing a proposal, maybe a Bitcoin improvement proposal, to utilize not our beacon chain, not Ethereum's beacon chain, but a beacon chain, you know, an instantiation of the same technology to do a merge for Bitcoin and to help them get off of proof of work. There are some complexities there in how you actually lock your stake. You might need a new opcode, and I know they're pretty resistant to that, but I think it'd be pretty fun, even to just take
as a social experiment. Yeah.
I mean, literally just like, you know, in 2017, there were 100,000 Bitcoin forks, like Bitcoin Diamond and whatever the hell. You could make a Bitcoin fork. Once Ethereum has proven that you can safely move from proof of work to proof of stake, you can make a Bitcoin fork and try to rally the world around it, using the same technology that we've used in Ethereum to secure it.
I think who does that really matters, right?
Yeah.
Well, why not you?
That's what I'll do. Once Ethereum ossifies, I'm gonna help Bitcoin
move to proof of stake.
Yeah.
What about Rune Christensen's blog post? Was recent blog post? I don't know if you read that or not. Was that a topic of conversation at the Interop event?
I don't know the blog post. I'm sorry.
He was proposing that MakerDAO, with its efforts to go into the real world and search for real world collateral, specifically finds climate aligned collateral, right? So MakerDAO has already financed like a $2.4 million loan to a solar panel farm in New York. And then he talked about, like, you know, more philosophically, MakerDAO should find a collateral, like find opportunities to finance and get collateral that is climate aligned and can actually like move the needle with regards to climate change. And then
we didn't come up with conversation. That's interesting. I mean, there's two different angles there. One is like ride the hype, like maybe you get good press and it helps MakerDAO to just like have this aligned basket. But there's also like, I think it's more interesting if you can make a compelling business case. You know, maybe the thesis is that these are actually the the types of collateral and the types of businesses that are going to be very fruitful over the next 10 to 20 years. And that's why, MakerDAO is being aligned. I don't know exactly his angle there.
Yeah. My angle on it was that like, there's a lot of, the very far left social justice warrior cancel culture types that are also very, very anti-capitalism. Mm-hmm. And what happens if you can like create a money that fights climate change, where if you use this money, you're by proxy fighting climate change. Like you actually might onboard some of that demographic into the world of money and finance and say like, yeah, we do know that money and finance is corrupt and bad, but not this money and finance. Like this money and finance is actually good. It's the inverse of that. Yeah.
Why don't you learn to use money and finance and new coordination techniques to create the world you want to see?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So one thing about the Dev interop event and overall, like I was joking with I think both Ryan and Anthony Susano in different contexts about this, like from you know what it's like to be there and actually to experience it. A lot of us, the non-tech types, view it from a distance, right? View it from Twitter and we just see the pictures. And so like, from our perspective, it's like this semi-regular, like ceremonious time where we see pictures of all these developers looking at this projected screen with a bunch of code on it. And they're all happy. They're all happy and clapping. And so like all the devs are like looking at the screen and everyone's smiling. And then like everyone else is seeing the smiles on the devs face. And so for us, it's like, yay, the devs are happy. I don't know what's going on, but like they're happy. So that's nice.
I showed that picture to my sister last night and I showed her the other picture from Ben Edgington's tweet. And I showed her the other picture of the screen we're all looking at. And she just cracked up. She thought it was hilarious. She's like, of course. For context, I don't know if it was on that picture, but one of the pictures that was shared, the key was there's a tiny little piece of text that said proof of stake stage entered proof of stake stage, and that's what we were all cheering about.
Right. Okay. So this is the first mock testnet or actual testnet for the merge. So you simulated the merge. Was that what happened?
Right. So we kicked off a proof of stake beacon chain that was not merged, like the beacon chain is today in production. And we kicked off a proof of work chain that was not merged and was run by proof of work. Both of these things hung out in parallel for a while. And then they did the dance to take the valuable things inside of proof of work and to instead put them into proof of stake and stop listening to proof of work and finalize and move on with its business. So it was what we were cheering was kind of the culmination of the week, which was we had a lot of very short-lived dev nets. So like even just transitory, I have 2 nodes running on my computer, like running an experiment for 30 minutes. And I'm like, okay, the experiment worked. That's good. And we had, like I said, we had a lot of these different client pairs where like Geth and Teku would like pair up for a bit and like make sure the software worked together, and Nimbus and Nethermind would pair off and like make sure the software worked together. And like we were building out more and more complex versions of all the interactions throughout the week. But often, with 2 or 3 nodes, like nothing crazy, like very small toy networks. And what we did at the end of the week was Perry, who is a DevOps wizard at the EF, who has been increasingly taking ownership over test nets and automation and all sorts of stuff. He'd been working all week on automation of all this stuff. And so he took all the configuration and automated a 100 node deploy around the world. So like 100 different cloud instances around the world with different client pairs and builds, and like automated the creation of the beacon chain network and the proof of work network and kind of kicked it all into motion. And then it was about, I think they ran independently for about an hour. And then we had it on the projector when the trigger event came together and they merged. And so it was really that, like taking it from a toy on our laptops and, different like reduction in complexity of different configurations to like bringing it to something that really, felt real. That network, I think, was torn down yesterday, and there's a new one, Pithos, which is the it's supposed to be a longer standing one. Was it launched literally like an hour? It was launched this morning, but like the configurations became available about an hour ago, and I already started seeing some of the ETHStaker guys. I think Lamboshi was on it. He was already running nodes, and so now the community can also interact with it.
Can you tell us what the sound was like when in the room when that proof of stake mode happened? Like, was it like, oh, yay, neat? Or was it like more of a roar of people? Like
it was legitimate joy, legitimate like clapping, not just like a little golf clap, but like clapping, cheering. People literally hugged each other, It was an incredible energy. And we had this closing dinner at 7:30 that night. And the timestamp that we did the merge, because proof of works, especially when you're CPU mining a proof of work chain, it's like hard to fully gauge the timing, but it was 7:29. It was T-1 minute till dinner. Like we were either going to go to dinner, like super fucking excited and floored about what just happened, or like kind of with our heads hung, like the last chance of running this experiment, it failed, and it was a success. And like we all just went to dinner after and had a great evening celebrating.
That's so, yeah, a minute before you have to go to dinner. So I'm sure maybe some amount of clapping was like, oh, thank God we get to go to dinner.
I doubt. I think we were all a bit late for dinner, but it was the timing couldn't have been better. It couldn't have been more suspense inducing.
Dramatic. Yeah. Did you get shivers?
I probably not. I got something. I got what I needed to get.
In a completely different direction. Is your wife a crypto person?
Yes. Kind of.
Does she understand like what you're up to?
My wife works for the Ethereum Foundation.
Oh, okay. So she, well, there's the answer to that question. Yeah. Was she there with you?
She used to be a pastry chef in a French restaurant in the French Quarter in New Orleans. And I started traveling a bunch for work. And so us being, young and having fun, I was like, well, definitely quit your job and come travel internationally with me a bunch. And she got to know some of the people on the grants team, and they needed someone to help like answer emails and stuff. So she started as the person who helped answer emails and stuff. And then like 3 or 4 months later was the team lead.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. So like when you were like you work at home, but when you quote, come home from work and like vent about stuff, like she's like, oh God, the guys from Teku were just up so annoying today. Is that some of the conversations that go on?
Yes. I certainly, she knows when I'm bitching about something, she knows what I'm bitching about. And she understands things enough to like, when I describe some issue, I'm banging my head against the wall. She like understands the domain of the issue. Right. But it's also, sometimes we'll be like driving into the mountains for a weekend, and we'll just be like talking about Ethereum and be like, we got to stop.
No more.
we I can literally talk about Ethereum all day to the people on the internet, and then I can like go have dinner and talk about Ethereum more. And it's very cool, but it's also sometimes a little much.
Eric Connor, who is the first ever guest on Layer Zero, we were talking about this dynamic where like you literally can wake up and do Ethereum things until you go to bed, and then repeat that for years. And then you get what we've called this thing called Ethereum brain, where like, you just have like toxic levels of Ethereum going around in your brain. But you said you have good work-life balance. So maybe you don't have too much Ethereum brain.
I have a good work-life balance. I do get a step away from the computer. I do make sure I have nice little trips and things like that. And I do go out to dinner and stuff, but I also I'm probably toxically infected.
When you say you guys go to the mountains, are you hiking or backpacking?
A bit of both. It just kind of depends. Sometimes we'll go stay at a motel in the mountains and hike around a bit and putt around some towns, or sometimes we'll go backpacking. And my favorite thing is to swim in very cold alpine lakes. So often we'll be hiking up to 13,000 feet to find a nice lake to jump into.
Yeah, which was like recently snow a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends. I mean, sometimes there's like snow on the outside of it still. It just depends on the time of the year. I think we're at the minimum snow. Hey, Tycho. 3 weeks ago, and I think it snowed up in the mountains about a week ago. So the cycle has begun.
If your cat hadn't come on screen, I was going to ask about it. So
that's Tycho.
Tycho.
Yeah.
How old?
He's 8.
8. Yeah. The image I have of you, we were on Zoom at some point in time, but there was this time where you had Tycho, and Tycho was facing the computer. So he was facing the computer, so like kind of like pseudo looking at the camera, and you were just like massaging his head. It was like at least 20 minutes long. Of like just like massaging your head while Tycho like kind of looked into the camera right in front of you. I thought it was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, and there he is. Yeah. I mean, I tell Tycho sometimes, Tycho, you're my best friend. Yeah, and I mean it, and not in a sad way. Tycho's my best friend.
Nice.
Yeah, he's spent a lot of time working on proof of stake with me.
Nice. Yeah, moral support. Yeah. Danny, you can do it. Danny, so what else do you do for fun other than backpacking and hiking? Are you a gamer at all? Nope.
I probably left gaming behind when I was about 13.
Okay.
I played, I think, Diablo 2 and StarCraft were my main games at the time. I played a little bit of Counter-Strike and stuff, but music and girls became a much more interesting way to spend my time. So
playing or listening?
To girls?
No, to music.
Oh. Playing.
What do you play?
These days I play mainly piano, but in high school I played a lot of piano, but also bass. I played in like jazz bands and metal bands.
Yeah. And you still play piano to this day?
When I was 18, I went to school and I stopped playing music. Mm-hmm. And about 4 years ago, I got a piano, and I play about every day. So I took a hiatus, but I play most days now, and I very much enjoy it.
What kind of piano do you play?
I learned some classical pieces and play that. I also just kind of mess around, and I do actually, when we launched the Beacon Chain, I bought myself a present. Mm-hmm. I got this like Moog synth. So I have a piano and I have this synth next to each other, and like, I kind of mess around and make weird electronic stuff between the two.
Nice. Have you heard of Ben from Optimism, his Ethereum song?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
Ever thought about writing something like that?
I'm not.
Or is that tainting something that's holy that doesn't need to be mixed?
I think it definitely doesn't need to be mixed. I also I don't think I've ever played the piano and sang at the same time. So it would be a challenge. It'd be a new challenge. Maybe I should try.
So I think this question is always much more fun when somebody's actually a musician. What kind of music do you listen to?
So in college, my music taste changed because I started coding.
No shit.
So I stopped listening to music with words, like almost entirely, and started listening to a lot more electronic music. And I listened to like ambient electronic music most of the time. Very experimental, like very like kind of out there sounds and soundscapes and things like that. And I can definitely attribute that to like being in college, drinking that cup of coffee, putting on my headphones and just like coding and like getting into coding for the first time, and like what got me going when I code. And like that radically has changed my music taste. And over the past couple of years, I've like tried to reintroduce, not when I'm coding, but like if I'm in the car or different things like that, like I'll put on, I don't know, Talking Heads, or put on like the Beatles, or put on something where somebody's literally saying words to like pull myself out of the the ether. But
is it because the words are distracting while you're coding, or is there something else there?
I think so. I think that's probably it. I mean, it's not just that the words are distracting, it's that these soundscapes are like enhancing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a good one. When I first, in 2017, when I got rid of my clients and I wanted to figure out how to make Ethereum my work, I would listen to all the all core dev calls, and the opening is Steep Hills of Vicodin Tears by A Winged Victory for a Sullen.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. So that became like my anthem for a while. Like that album, like every morning I would just I'd drink a cup of coffee, put on the headphones and like figure out how to make Ethereum, where to bring value to Ethereum. And I would just like listen to that album, and something about the fact that it's the opener to the all core dev call. And that it also kind of fit my ambient soundscape mode. Like it became like my power music.
That's awesome. That's a great story. Andy, Danny, as we come down to the end of the show, I have just a few more questions for you. Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
I used to be an optimist. So when I was a kid, very extremely optimistic, and I think it served me well. And I've realized actually probably over the course of the past 10 years, I've become less of one. So I'm very optimistic about my life. So like I have a good life. I have a great cat, got a cool wife. I have a great job, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm definitely optimistic in social relationships and kind of the microcosm of my world. But I definitely like the old man, like shaking his finger at the rest of the world in a certain sense. Like I'm super pessimistic about politics. I'm super pessimistic about like mass surveillance capitalism. I'm super pessimistic about a lot of that kind of stuff. And to a way that I need to make peace with, because I think it like gets me a little bit too much. And I also sound like the whack job when I'm talking to regular people, but but that's also one of the reasons I work on Ethereum. If you asked me in 2017 why I wanted to work on Ethereum, one, nerd sniped totally, but two was just like I don't like the trajectory of the world. I don't like what's happening with big technology. I don't like how we're all super manipulated by our phones, and like we have these little slot machines in our pockets and they're just like abusing us. And like I don't think Ethereum solves all of those problems, but I do think that Ethereum and related technology might help change the trajectory. And I think it might help change the trajectory for good. You never know. I do worry about that sometimes, like the tools that are built are often co-opted by the powers that be to kind of continue doing business as usual. I do think that Ethereum and related technologies allow for new ways to interact and maybe kind of help avoid some of those previous issues. But, I'm also naive.
Well, Danny, I think that is a fantastic place to end this conversation. So thank you for joining me on this Layer Zero.
Thank you. Very much enjoyed it.
Cheers. Hey, we hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, head over to Bankless HQ right now to develop your crypto investing skills and learn how to free yourself from banks and gain your financial independence. We recommend joining our daily newsletter, podcast, and community as a Bankless Premium subscriber to get the most out of your Bankless experience. You'll get access to our market analysis, our alpha leaks, and exclusive content, and even the Bankless token for airdrops, raffles, and unlocks. If you're interested in crypto, the Bankless community is where you want to be. Click the link in the description to become a Bankless Premium subscriber today. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for in-depth interviews with industry leaders, Ask Me Anythings, and weekly roll-ups where we summarize the week in crypto and other fantastic content. Thanks everyone for watching and being on the journey as we build out the Bankless Nation.